Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. Today's video is going to be another Patreon exclusive fabric haul, and I know I did one of these pretty recently, but that was actually filmed several months ago and I just put off posting about it. So there has been a very brief intermission, as in several months, between my fabric shopping adventures. And this fabric shopping adventure wasn't supposed to even involve fabric shopping. Basically what happened is that I wanted to go into New York City for Manhattan Vintage, which is a huge vintage clothing expo that has over 70 vendors. However, that didn't start until 1 p.m. and my dad ended up driving me to the train station on his way to work. So I got into New York City around 11 and had a few hours to kill. My plan was to go to my favorite feather shop, which is called High Trims. And going to a feather shop might sound kind of strange, but I use feathers for pretty much every costume I make, usually to trim hats that match whatever costume I'm working on. So feathers are something that I deal with quite a lot, and they're not something that I have a lot of in my stash. Though I have tons of fabric in my sewing room, I only have maybe a half dozen or so ostrich plumes, which are located behind me. So whenever I'm making something that requires ostrich plumes, I just have to make do with the ones I already have in my stash, or try and buy what I think I might end up needing without really having a design ironed out when I'm in New York City also buying the fabric for whatever that project is. So anyway, I wanted to pad my feathers stash out a little bit so I'd have more on hand for whatever I feel like making in the future, sort of similar to how I have a large fabric stash that I can pull from when I feel inspired. So I knew that I wanted to get ostrich plumes in quite a few different colors, just so I'd have all my bases covered, and I also wanted to get some specifically for some hats I've been commissioned to make by McCall's. So my goal was to go to High Trimming and really enjoy looking around. However, I couldn't actually find High Trimmings. I thought it was on 40th Street, but it was actually on 37th. So I kind of aimlessly wandered around 38th and 39th Street. While I was in the area, I decided to go into a few different stores because I wanted to get contrasting silk fabrics for some projects that I have for McCall's. All I needed, at most, was 4 yards of silk charmeuse. So I figured I could buy it and it would be easy to carry and I wouldn't be weighed down throughout the day. So I went to Diana's Fabrics first. They didn't have what I needed. And then I went to Ahmad's Fabrics, and they didn't have quite what I was looking for, but they had other silk charmeuse that were absolutely gorgeous that I wanted to buy anyways. And then I found a few other gorgeous fabrics they had that I wanted to buy anyways. And by that point, I picked out way more than I could actually carry around all day as I went to the expo. So I asked them if they'd cut the fabrics for me and I could come back for them at the end of the day, and they said yes. And then, because I still hadn't quite found what I needed for the McCall's project, I went to another store and ended up finding lots of things that I loved there too. So after going to Manhattan Vintage, I came back to the Garment District and I ended up buying 40 pounds of fabric. And if you're wondering what 40 pounds of fabric looks like, I will show you. It looks like this, and it's very, very heavy, and I'm very weak. And I almost died on the 1 mile walk back to Penn Station whilst carrying all of that. And in case you were worried my feather quest ended up being unsuccessful, I did end up finding High Trims, and I bought lots of feathers, and it actually ended up being a little bit too successful if you look at my receipt from them. So I had a really fun day and I found some really gorgeous things and I wanted to share them with you, so I really hope you enjoy seeing all that I found. I'd love to know your thoughts on my purchases or even about your recent purchases. Have you bought anything recently? Let me know. So before showing you what I actually purchased in the Garment District, of which there's quite a lot, I want to give context to some of those purchases by showing you some fabrics I already have in my stash. So my main reason for going to the fabric stores was that I got lost and couldn't find the feather store, but also that I was recently commissioned to make a few things for McCall's and I didn't quite have all of the materials on hand. One of those projects is the long coat and the other project is a series of hats. So I wanted to pick up some charmeuse that I could use as sashes for the hats and also some fabric that I could use as lining and contrasting material for the coat. This is the main fabric I'm going to be using for the coat. It's an absolutely beautiful wool Shetland that's made in Scotland. I purchased this from Fabric Mart and I adore it. I think the color is amazing, I think the weight's amazing, I think the texture is amazing, and I can't wait to see how this turns into a coat. When I originally pitched the coat project to McCall's, I included swatches of this fabric, and I also included swatches of this fabric, which is a bright green China silk that I already had in my stash. But I only have 1 yard of this fabric, which isn't really enough to use it as contrast for a hat as well as a jacket. I also purchased this fabric, which is a quilting cotton that has a polka dot print to it, and though the overall shade is kind of a pale burgundy-ish tone, it does have a slightly greenish toned or warmer toned brown dots on it. So I thought the green fabric also brought out the print in this material, which I originally was planning on using to make a dress that goes underneath the coat. That design didn't end up being selected, but I kind of want to make it anyways, so I definitely wanted a contrasting fabric that I had enough of to incorporate into the dress underneath the coat as well. So So my main goal of going into the fabric store was to find various fabrics I could use for sashes on hats, as well as a material in this same color, but in a larger quantity. This is also China silk, which isn't my favorite fabric to work with. I find it's really prone to puckering. It doesn't have the lovely sheen that you get with something like charmeuse. So the silk charmeuse selection was the first place that I headed to when I got into a fabric store, and the fabric store I went into first was Hamad's Fabrics. And in a surprise to no one, I ended up buying some charmeuse. But you might notice none of these are the bright green color that I originally mentioned. They didn't have anything that was anywhere near the color that I was looking for, but I did find this brown charmeuse. It's like a chocolatey burgundy color, which I thought would look really nice with the orange as well. So I ended up purchasing 3 yards of this to use as a backup if I couldn't end up finding the bright green I was looking for. And I also just thought it was really lovely and might potentially work for one of the hats I was commissioned to make, or as lining for a jacket I make in the future. I just thought it was a really lovely color, and it had the potential to work nicely within this project. So I purchased that, and then though I couldn't find the green, I did find 2 other colors of charmeuse that I fell in love with. Something about the tones in these just really stuck out to me. The first one is this beautiful red raspberry-ish tone, and the quality of this charmeuse is lovely. It just feels like liquid. It's stunning. So these were the 2 colors that really struck out to me. Just the rich raspberry and then this kind of purplish tone. I just thought they were beautiful. And I decided that I would get 2 yards of each, and then I could use them as contrasting fabrics for something I make in the future, or for hats, or I don't know what. I just thought they were too lovely to leave behind, and the colors of them were so inspiring to me. And then I headed over to the silk taffeta and shantung section, figuring that they might have something in that realm that was the color that I was originally looking for. And they did. So I ended up buying 3 yards of this pistachio greenish colored silk taffeta, and this isn't quite the color I had in mind. This is the original fabric, and this is what I ended up purchasing. So it's a little bit paler and more of a goldenish yellow tone. I'd call it like a pale pistachio, where this is more of a lime green, but I think the color is really lovely and that it works really well with the other fabrics I already had for this project, as you can see here. I also think the weight of this is a little bit nicer. It's going to stand up more, so if I use it for bows on a bustle dress, it will really hold its own more so than a silk charmeuse would. But in the store, this looked a little bit different, and I wasn't confident that it was going to be the fabric for this project. So though I decided to buy some of it, it was really just a backup plan, and I was still on the hunt for a charmeuse that I could use instead. At this point, I still hadn't found quite what I'd set out to find, but I hadn't purchased too much. I still had plenty of room in my bag, so I decided that I would carry on my search at the shantings and look for something that would work well for lining for the coat. And I ended up finding this tissue silk shantung / taffeta. It kind of feels like something in between those, and isn't so heavy that it's going to make the coat look very boxy and stiff, but it's also structured enough that it should work really well for flat lining the wool pieces. So I'm really happy with this fabric, and I'm really happy with the color too, that I didn't need the lining to be a fancy silk. I saw this and I thought it was perfect, so I decided to get it. And this is where I should have stopped. But I was in the shantung section and I came across a material that I really wanted. Here it is! This fabric might look vaguely familiar if you've seen some of my other videos, because I've actually purchased this fabric in 2 other colors, and I've used both of those fabrics to make dresses. I used this fabric in a dark green tone for my Christmas project last year, and earlier this year I made a pink robe à la française out of a peachy tone version of this material. So even though it's a fabric I've come into contact with quite frequently, I'd never seen it in this color before. It's like an icy sage aqua-ish green, and it's just beautiful. It's a true minty color, but it has the prettiest sheen to it, and it looks almost iridescent and like silvery when the light hits it. I just thought it was beautiful. And as soon as I thought this, I knew I couldn't leave it behind. So this is when I ended up asking the people if I could get stuff cut and come back for it at the end of the day. And since I go into that shop pretty frequently, they said yes. So I decided to get 20 yards of this, so that should be enough for a bustle dress or for something 18th century themed, which is definitely what I'm leaning towards with this fabric in mind. So once I decided to purchase this, I knew I was coming back at the end of the day. I went a little crazy and I bought a few more things than I probably should have. And this is one of those things that I probably shouldn't have bought, but I have no regrets over. So this is the wrong side of the fabric, and this is the right side. So this is a polyester taffeta, but it's a really nice kind of sturdy feeling polyester taffeta. It doesn't feel really cheap and like it's going to be very prone to puckering and not iron well the way that some polyester taffetas do. What stuck out to me about this was the deep burgundy color. I am a sucker for red fabrics. I also loved the stripes. You'll probably know that I really gravitate towards striped fabrics. I love playing around with getting stripes to line up, up and doing chevron design or pleats or just something that takes advantage of the striped print. So it stuck out to me for that reason as well. And then it's got little black stripes and little silver stripes and then little red stripes in between that. So it's just a really pretty fabric, and I've actually worked with this fabric before in gray, and I made a short Renaissance inspired dress out of it, which was very strange. I did like working with that fabric, and I've been on the lookout for more. So when I saw that they had it in red, I couldn't help but ask what the price was, and they said $5 a yard, so I ended up getting 12 yards of it. Not sure what I'm going to do with this. Maybe it'll be for something Renaissance themed. I can kind of revisit that concept with this fabric, or maybe it will be a bustle dress or for a Christmas costume. I have no clue, but I just thought it was a really cool fabric and I want to have it in my stash. Now this is the largest fabric that I purchased from them. Not the largest quantity of fabric, since I got 20 yards of the green fabric. I think I only got 12 yards of this, but as you can see, it is a girthy one and it is a heavy one, and it was quite torturous carrying this a mile back to the train station, but it's beautiful. So this is probably upholstery weight fabric, but I've never let that stop me from using a fabric before, and I'm not going to now. So it's a thicker than what you would think of apparel weight fabric being, and it feels almost like a silk satin because it's a very densely woven satin, and it's quite crisp and doesn't have as strong of a sheen as a bridal satin does. So though it feels a little bit plasticky, the thickness of the fabric makes it feel quite luxurious too. And as you can probably tell, it's got white stripes, it's got pink stripes, and then it has these navy stripes. And the navy stripes are actually chenille, so they have a soft velvety texture to them, and it gives the fabric overall a really interesting texture. I thought this would be perfect for an 1880s seaside ensemble, and the 12 yards of it will hopefully be enough to accomplish that. They also had this fabric right next to a beautiful coordinating coral fabric, but I thought this might look nicer with a navy or an ivory, so I decided not to buy that, and I kind of regret it, but I also don't think I could have carried it home, so it was probably for the best. But this is one of the fabrics I'm most excited about, even though it was one of the most treacherous to carry, just because I haven't seen anything quite like it before, and I think it's going to be really fun to work with. Also from Ahmad's Fabrics, I ended up purchasing this really beautiful silk satin. I think you can just tell by the sheen that this is a very high quality, quite crisp, quite thick silk satin, and they had 6 yards of it. I'm really excited to work with this. I just think it's beautiful, and I bought it mostly because I want to use it for some of the hats I have to make for McCall's, but I also think it would make a lovely Regency dress with some really pretty trimming on it. And 6 yards of it allows me to have enough for both. And then lastly, I just purchased 3 yards of this silk cotton broadcloth, and I purchased this for a blouse for a riding habit that I'm hoping to make later on this year or early next year. And I'll show you the fabric that I have for that in a minute. It's a beautiful bright red wool, and I just thought the weight of this would be really nice for something to go underneath a coat. So I got 3 yards of that. And then I briefly visited what I think is called Butterfly Fabrics. It's right next door to Diana's Fabrics, and I've been in there a few times over the years, and I've purchased a few things from them over the years, and I've never loved the store. I'm not sure why. I think I just got a bad vibe from the people there, or the prices were too high or something, but it's not a store that I've made a habit of visiting. However, they have a huge range of silks. Pretty much everything they sell is silks, and they have every color and type you can imagine. So when I wanted a silk charmeuse in this vibrant lime green color, I knew this was the place to go. And they did end up having what I was looking for, except they wouldn't let me cut the stuff and then come back for it. So I decided I would revisit it at the end of the day, and in the meantime, I went to High Trimmings, which is where I purchased an abundance of feathers. And I'm not kidding when I say abundance. Some of these I have specific projects in mind for, but I really just wanted to build up my feather stash, similar to how I have a pretty vast fabric stash, and I can pull from that and make things on a whim when I feel inspired. I want to have something similar with my stash of feathers. So I don't know a lot about different types of feathers, but I will try and at least explain what I purchased. I believe these are goose feathers, and they're brown, and I purchased these for a Sherlock Holmes inspired 1881 ensemble, which I actually already have in progress, and you've probably seen my concept sketches for. So I just wanted something to decorate the hat that were small and had a lot of texture, so I purchased this little bundle for that. And then I purchased another bundle of the same style of feathers in lime green, and as I said, I'm planning on using this color as a contrasting fabric for a coat, as well as potentially a natural form or a gown, so I wanted to get something that I could use on a coordinating hat. This color just really stuck out to me. It was very similar to the bright pink silk charmeuse that I purchased earlier in the day, and I have some taffeta in my stash that is quite similar to this color as well, so I decided I had to grab a bunch in this tone. And then I purchased a very similar bundle of feathers, but these are much flowier and lighter. They're not nearly as stiff, and they're also a little bit brighter in terms of color. This is kind of a burgundy-ish red, whereas this is more of a bright pink. I thought the texture and movement of these was really interesting and that it would be really stunning on a hat, and again, it kind of matches some fabrics that I already already own, as well as a fabric I purchased earlier in the day. Then I purchased this little tiny bundle of orangey-ish colored feathers. I just thought the color of this was quite neat. It would work well with brown tone fabrics or golden tone fabrics or orange tone fabrics or really lots of different colors of material that I have in my stash. And they're quite short and small and fluffy, which means you have a lot more versatility with where you place them as opposed to a very large stiff feather. So I thought this would be fun to play around with. Then these guys are all the same type of feather. I have a few colors of these in my stash already, and they're really fun to work with since they're quite spiky, and you can attach little bundles of them to hat and just get a really interesting effect. I think I have them in bright green and black, but I wanted to add to my stash and get a few colors I thought I might reach for often. Again, these two were purchased kind of because they were similar in tone to fabrics I'd already bought that day, but I do actually have some materials in my stash as well, which you might recognize from my previous fabric haul, that are in these tones too. So I thought they would be a good addition to my stash. And then the brown is kind of for that Sherlock Holmes project that I have planned, but also because brown is a neutral tone and it's really versatile. The same sort of thing is going on with the gray. I've got some fabrics in my stash that would match, but I also just thought it was a really versatile color to have in my stash, and the same can be said for this beigey one that I purchased. So that's it for the bundles of feathers, but wait, there's more! I ended up buying a ton, and by ton I mean like 15 ostrich plumes. So I'll just go ahead and show you those really quickly. I got this one, which is a darkish purple color. I got two of these in a rusty brownish red. I think this color is absolutely gorgeous. I really want to make something kind of inspired by these feathers just because I think the color itself is so cool. And it's very autumny looking too. I got a bright green feather. This color looked a little bit muted in store. I'm not sure I'm actually going to get a whole lot of use out of this, but I do think it's a really fantastic color, just not perhaps the most versatile and the best choice to make. This is a slightly more muted sagey green colored feather, which I think is a much better choice. I probably should have gotten two of these and put back the lime green one, but I think this is really lovely and I already have an Edwardian hat in mind for it. I don't have any plans for this one. It was purchased just to pad out my collection, and it's like a grassy olive green. Something I discovered on this shopping trip is that navy colored feathers are really hard to find. They're more of a royal blue tone than they are a deep, dark, kind of bluish off black, which is frustrating because I have a few projects I really wanted navy feathers for. This was the closest I could find and still a little bit brighter and more blue than I'd hoped, but I decided to get it anyways. This one is like extra floaty and lovely, and it's just a dark bluish gray. This one is in that lovely bright raspberry magenta pink color that I love so much. And then I got a white one because I'm boring and white feathers are always good to have on hand. This is a smaller feather. I feel like I could have gotten more feather for my buck, but it's in really fantastic condition. It doesn't have any flaws to it. And it's in slightly more of a raspberryish red than the previous red feathers I showed you. This one is a very dreamy purple. It's almost two-tone effect in how it's dyed, and I just think it's stunning. And I got this inspired by that charmeuse that I found earlier in the day. This one is a multicolored feather in the way that it's been dyed. It's dyed to look almost striped. I just think it's a really cool effect, and I purchased this for an Edwardian hat that I already have plans for. This feather is like a corally-ish color, and I thought this matched the striped fabric that I purchased earlier in the day really nicely, and I actually purchased a few more coral feathers that you'll see in a minute. This one's just an olivey-ish brown tone, and again I thought this would be a pretty versatile color of feather to have on hand. But perhaps the most versatile of all are black feathers. So I purchased two that are very differently shaped. This one's kind of fat and very fluffy, and then this one's a little bit thinner and longer. So that just gives me some options when I want to use black feathers in the future. I purchased two smaller ostrich plumes that are black as well. For black and white feathers in this size, you can actually buy packs of 12 on Amazon or eBay that are really pretty good quality and look very similar for a lot less money. I just have a project that I'm working on now that I'd like to use black feathers on, so I didn't want to have to wait for shipping, but that is a good place to find feathers of this size if you're on the hunt. But for vibrant colors, they're much harder to find online, and the colors you see online aren't necessarily accurate. So for brighter tones, I like buying them in stores, like this corally toned feather. And I actually purchased two trimmed feathers that are in the same color as well. So I thought these would look really cool poking out the top of a hat and potentially being all paired together. I also purchased two very long, like here's my arm for reference, pheasant feathers, and I thought these would be absolutely beautiful and very dramatic coming off a hat. Potentially also for that Sherlock Holmes inspired suit that I have in progress, or maybe a black Edwardian suit. That'd be really cool. These are dyed pheasant feathers that are much shorter and narrower, and I think these were only $1 or $2 each, so I ended up getting two that were burgundy, two that were a brightish pinkish red, and then two that were this really dreamy violet purple color. So I ended up buying a lot more there than I expected, but I'm really happy with how my feather collection looks now, and I wouldn't change any of the purchases that I purchased, except for maybe that lime green feather. That might not have been the best choice. But speaking of lime green, later in the day I did go back for that lime green silk charmeuse, and ended up purchasing a few other other things too. So let's go through what I bought at the silk store. So on my way in to the silk store, which I think is called Butterfly Fabrics, can't really remember, but as I said, it's right next door to Diana's Fabrics, I was on the hunt for green silk charmeuse and nothing else. But much like at the first fabric store, I quickly lost my focus, like within 2 steps into the store. And the first fabric I saw, or the first fabrics I saw, was a beautiful selection of silk brocades. Now, these silk brocades were all $20 a yard, which is very, very expensive, and I wanted about 4 of them. They had one that was silver, they had one that was dark red, and then they had this gold one and this gold and white striped one. And there's just something about these. I don't know how well the camera is going to capture them. They're not the shiniest brocades I've ever seen. They're not the brightest in color. They're not the most luxurious I've seen, but they're probably the prettiest I've seen. There's just something about the sheen and the embroidery that makes them look very expensive. And the way they feel is stiff, almost like a taffeta, but very soft, almost like a cotton. It's just a very interesting material, and something about all of the prints, even though they weren't super vibrant or flashy, really, really made me want them. So in the end, I was kind of restrained, and I only purchased 1 of them, and I think when I do my Christmas fabric haul, I will probably have more of them to share because I don't think I'll be able to resist. But for now, I just bought 1 of them, and I purchased a 1.5 yards of this in the goldish tone, and I'm going to use this for a vest that goes underneath a riding habit. So this is the vest fabric. This is the blouse fabric that I got at Hamad's Fabrics that I showed you earlier. And this is going to be the habit fabric. I purchased this from a quilt store in New Hampshire, and it's actually sold by Moda, if I recall correctly, which is traditionally a quilting fabric company. But they sell the wool felts for various felt quilting hand embroidered projects. So you can get it in a variety of colors, but it tends to be about $30 a yard since it's really only intended to be used in small quantities. But this store had all of theirs on sale for $11.99, and they had a full bolt of the red version. So I ended up buying 8 yards of this, which should be enough for an 18th century riding habit. And while I was in New York City, I just so happened to find fabrics that would work really well for that project, so I decided to get them as well. Luckily, I did also end up finding what I was looking for. So this is that exact lime green color that I wanted, and it is a silk charmeuse, and I purchased 3 yards of it. Now, as I said, I actually ended up liking the shantung that I found more once I got home and started comparing the materials together. But have no fear, I'm still going to use this with something else because I found a couple other fabrics at this store that I fell in love with. The first of which is this silk shantung, and I love this material so much. I just immediately saw it and wanted it, and I asked how much it was, and they said a price that was in my price range, so I decided that I had to come back and get some of it. So this fabric has a dark teal base, and then it has purple stripes, and lime green colored stripes, and more teal stripes, and I just love it so much. As I think we've already discovered earlier in this video, I adore working with striped fabrics, and I adore working with silk shantung, and this combines both of them, and it's also blue and green, which are just 2 colors that I adore. And it just so happened to go perfectly with the lime green fabric that I was hunting for. So it seemed like fate that I should end up purchasing some of it. So I did. I got 12 yards of it, and I'm going to use it for either Civil War era gown or something bustle era inspired. It's not going to be the most elaborate gown just because I don't have a ton of this. Even though 12 yards sounds like a lot, once you start working with elliptical hoop skirts and ruffles, the fabric goes very, very quickly. However, 12 yards of fabric is enough to make a pretty basic gown from any era, so I feel like I have a good quantity to have some flexibility with what I end up making. So really no solid plans for this just yet, but I know I will get to use it someday, and I'm also going to get to use this charmeuse with it because they match perfectly. And speaking of matching perfectly, the next fabric there that caught my eye was this. Now, you might know my obsession with bright green fabrics because I have featured quite a few of them in my hauls throughout the years, but this is like the best of the green fabrics because it has multiple tones in green in it, and it's also got gold stripes in it and black stripes, and it's shiny and it's silk and it has a really pretty sheen, and I love it so much. I saw this fabric and I was just immediately like, oh crap, because I knew I had to buy it. I knew it would likely be there next time I was in shopping and probably fit better into my budget at that point than it did at the moment I ended up buying it. But I couldn't leave it behind because I loved it so much. And again, it goes so perfectly with the silk charmeuse. It was like an omen that I needed to purchase it. Do you see how good I am at justifying fabric purchases? It's really like a talent or a really crappy expensive superpower. But anyway, I loved this, and as soon as I saw it, I could envision a ridiculous 1830s dress with a huge pair of sleeves and a huge braided headdress, and I just wanted it so badly that I ended up buying it. in a shock to no one. But the thing about these two fabrics is they're very green, and we are going into autumn, and in autumn time I don't really want to make green dresses. I want to make orange dresses and red dresses and ones that pick up on the autumn color of the leaves. And unfortunately for my wallet, they happen to have fabrics that fit those criterias too. And then I saw this one, and this is more like a silk dupioni. So was the last green one that I showed you. They've got a lot more prominent of a slub in them, but the sheen and the print of them makes them look like a more solid weave than they actually are. So it can kind of pass as a taffeta, which is more historically accurate than a dupioni. Dupioni wasn't really used until the 1920s. But I don't like to let that stop my fabric purchasing process, because some fabrics are just too pretty not to make historical dresses out of, even if they aren't a type of fabric that is particularly historically accurate to that period. Anyway, so as I said, I like making orange dresses and red dresses and working with that color palette in the autumn. So as much as I love the two green fabrics, I knew buying them that I wouldn't get to work with them for a while. And then I found a fabric that I would get to work with almost immediately because it is purple and magenta and orange and brown and peach. This was in the same section as all the others, and as soon as I saw it, I had to buy it. I'm not like this with anything else. Not with antiques, not with shoes, but fabric, it's like some goblin takes over me and just tells me that I need it. And that was the situation with this fabric. I could just picture it over top of an elliptical hoop skirt with a little red bow around the neckline and some orange trimming, and it's just going to be beautiful, and I can photograph it against a fall landscape, and it's going to be stunning. And if that alone wasn't a good enough reason to buy it, it also perfectly matches the silk charmeuse that I purchased earlier in the day. The one that I thought was so beautiful and would be so perfect for a contrasting material on a dress. This is like the fabric it was meant to go with. I think the purple looks amazing with the orange, and it really picks up on those purple plaid stripes within this material, and they're just going to be beautiful together, and it looks perfect paired with the feathers that I purchased before buying this fabric, and it just seemed like I really should buy it, so I did. And then, while they were cutting that, I discovered another fabric that it seemed I was fated to purchase. This is another silk dupioni, and it is once again plaid, except this time it is magenta and burgundy and peach colored. And once again, this perfectly matches the charmeuse that I was so enchanted by at the other store. And it also perfectly matches some of the feathers that I purchased at the other store. So again, it just seemed like this fabric was calling to me. It had so many beautiful colors in it. I thought this would be really beautiful this time of year and kind of contrast with the orangey backdrop, but since it has those warmer tones in it, it would also blend in quite well. I just knew I could make something beautiful out of it, and I really wanted to bring it home with me. And then the final and most restrained purchase of this trip is just a 1-yard cut of silk dupioni. I got this to match a striped cotton fabric I have in my stash. I'm going to make a hat that matches it, and I wanted a coordinating green material to use for that. So that, my friends, is everything I bought on this impromptu trip into New York City. As I said, I wasn't planning on buying any fabric, and I ended up leaving with a ton of fabric. Okay, it was only 40 pounds of fabric, but it felt like a ton when I had to carry it a mile through Penn Station. But as I said, I have no regrets. I'm so happy with everything I purchased. I had so much fun looking through everything because I could just take my time to look around and see what really inspired me. And as you can probably see, a lot of stuff happened to inspire me. But again, I'm very happy with my purchases, and I really enjoyed purchasing them, and hopefully I'll enjoy working with them too. Thanks so much for coming on this little hauling adventure with me. As I said in the intro, I'd love to know about your recent fabric purchases or what your favorite fabric featured in this haul is. That'd be fun to know as well. And thanks again for watching. I'll talk to all of you very soon.